Hey everyone, it's John Malora. So I've always wanted to do a really cool Christmas card where I create it in digital space, and I finally took a course this year called Full-Time Photographer by Josh Rossi. He's done some amazing stuff. You've probably seen it. He did the Wonder Woman shoot of his kid and just does a bunch of other stuff and is a super fabulous instructor. So this is my first attempt to create a composite like this, so I'm going to step you through how I did all of it. This picture that you're seeing here is actually made up of 8 separate photos, and I'm going to show what each photo looked like and step you through the methodology of how I did it.
So I opted for a super basic setup. Here's the ornament that my son and daughter were holding. But I was going to use umbrellas and all this other stuff. Then I realized where I'm shooting my basement, which is very Silence of the Lambs-ish, I have this silver insulation. So I use that basically as a giant reflector. So just set it up there as a single flashpoint flash, controlled with my flashpoint R2T, and that was it.
Okay, so I shot everyone pretty much on a green screen except for a few of the shots. So here you can see my wife against the green screen. And one of the things that made this whole thing a success is I sketched it out first. Not the world's greatest sketcher, but I did this sketch while sitting waiting to pick my kids up for school when I had the initial idea. So that really helped direct things, and of course we shifted some things around when we actually got into the creative process. But you can see he shot her against the green screen just in Photoshop. Just used pretty much the auto select tool to select her and pull her out of the background. Same with the ornament here. So you can see, pulled the ornament out, but the hook kind of got lost in the mix. So what I did was I actually went in and cut the hook out, and for the actual shoot beefed up the hook and put that in. So I guess technically I used 8.5 photos, but I'll show you all those details in a minute here. So my one daughter here, I had her up on a stool, and you can see we actually shot this in my basement just because that was the biggest space we had available, and I don't want to drag everyone into my studio. So I knew I was going to have her putting the hook up on the tree, so I had her hold something that I wanted to be about the same size. So this is just a chunk of pipe that I had in the basement here, so nothing fancy, but I wanted to have her have a natural positioning of her hand. So I grabbed something that in the digital space I'd be able to pretty much have her hold. So you can see, boop, disappeared. Next photo are my oldest daughter and my son. I didn't do a good job of telling them not to wear green. So what I did was I just put a white sheet up here. It's actually just a plain old drop cloth. I was working with what I had. And also the exercise ball that they're holding here, that's going to be the stand-in for the ornament. Again, just like my other daughter holding the pipe, I wanted them to have natural hand positioning, so I grabbed something that was going to be about the right ratio, and our exercise ball worked just perfectly. So what I did was I went ahead and cut them out of the background. I had to go in and manually cut out around here. I couldn't really use the auto select tool because it works on color differences. So I went in and did that, no big problem, but you can see I removed the ball, and what I did was I put the ornament back in here. And the ornament, all I did was I brought the file in, and then I would make it transparent, and then all I did was would just adjust the scale until I got it just about right. And again, what I was going for was getting it right down here around where their hands were touching it. Alright, so here's me. I knew I wanted to have an ode to the father of Christmas, Clark Griswold from National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. So I wanted to have plugs coming together. So again, if I had to do this over again, I would not have photographed these against the green screen. I would have just grabbed a piece of white something or other and put it behind there and make my job of cutting it out easier. But I didn't, so I just had to go in and actually did a pretty decent job of cutting it out automatically. So I shot those separately, and I held my hands about the size that I wanted the plugs to be. and my faithful dog Henley there down beside me wondering what I was up to. So that worked out quite well. So just like in National Lampoons, I want to have some sparks coming out of these plugs coming together. And I couldn't find a picture online that didn't have any copyright usage. So I went through a whole thing. I was going to grab a cigarette lighter and photograph in the dark sparking. Then I realized I'd actually done a photo shoot for survival equipment. So here's a picture of Rex, my model there, striking some survival equipment, some fire starters. And I went in and just photoshopped that and brought it in. So those were all the photos. And then, of course, I shot the background here, which is just a picture of our family Christmas tree. So all I did was shoot the background there, and there's tons of different layers in here. And I'm going to step you through each one and what each one did. And then the final editing I did in Adobe Lightroom. So I'm going to go ahead and just kind of start from the ground up here. Alright, so obviously the background is critical, and you can see this layer here. What I had was just an adjustment layer where I adjusted the exposure, what they call levels in Photoshop, to make it all blend. And in here in Photoshop, the way this works is it works in layers where it actually just kind of stacks on, just like transparencies of old. And as you can see, there's tons and tons of layers. I don't even know how many I did. I probably should have counted that, but it's a lot. So it's real critical to label them, especially when you start getting into more complex things like this. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down a lot of the different adjustment layers. And I'm going to show right here where I brought my wife in. So this was actually probably a pretty difficult thing to do before for my first major composite, just because there's all these different light sources because of the Christmas lights, and that's what helps make these things look somewhat natural. Obviously it's fanciful and not real, but getting the light sources correct. So this is how she looks whenever she comes in. And what I did was you can actually paint out what they call a mask in Photoshop, and you can paint out around, I painted out around her feet so it looks like she's actually standing behind stuff, and then went in and just also added in some light behind her head and did a bunch of different adjustment layers to try to get her to match the background scene. So there's some more light right there. So that's how I did Brenda. Go ahead, show how I did myself here. So you can see here's the actual spark. There's some spark light that I had, because I'll get into that in a second. So I brought the plug in, and the plug, actually you can see it kind of has like the Army Man green color on it, and that was just to make it stand out more. So when I brought myself in here, let me shut that down too. So here's how I came in. Obviously that doesn't look natural at all, so I went ahead and painted myself out, put myself behind this tree, and really all it does is it kind of erases or hides or masks my legs to give that illusion of depth. So then I went ahead, you can see the plug here, all these different layers that go into it just to make it look somewhat natural. So whenever I brought the plug in, this is how it comes in. It just plopped down right on top of me, and didn't look right because my hands would have been around it. So what I did was I just went ahead and painted out the plug, and also had my hands there and added in a little bit of shadows. And then I had to readjust where the wire was coming out. So I went ahead and did that. Added a little bit of blur to it to give that illusion that it was going back into the tree, because otherwise it would have stood out and not matched the background that I wanted it to blend with. So I wanted it to be a little bit blurred back there. Alright, so this layer here, I just adjusted the levels, and tinkered around with some stuff to make it really just pop out of the page. Again, that's not really the color they are, but we weren't going for totally natural. So as you saw in the picture, Henley and I were actually photographed together in the picture, but she was a little bit too far away. So what I did was I went ahead and actually cut her out and made her her own layer so I could move her around. You can see here I have Henley moving around, and she even has her own little light source up there. So what I did was, with Henley, other than cutting her around, again, see how crisp that edge is? That wouldn't look right. So I went ahead and just kind of blurred things out and tucked her paw down behind that little branch there. Adjusted her lighting because just where she happened to be, there were these light sources here. So I had to go ahead and also light her up like that. Because I wanted her head to be a little bit lit up to make her stand out, I actually just copied in a light from somewhere else and put it here, and then brightened her up all around, you can see, to mimic what it would look like if this light had actually been there. Alright, so that's me, Brenda, and Henley. Alright, so getting the kids in there. So here they are, all three of them, riding the ornament, and I'm going to step through how I did each one. Alright, so I brought the ornament in, and I had scaled everything up in the other program as I showed you before over the exercise ball. And my daughter here brought her in and plopped her down, and you'll see it doesn't really look natural here, and I'm going to get into that in a second. I have a shadows layer where I actually went in and painted everything to make it a little bit darker to give it a little bit more realistic feeling. So you can see here, actually she's not even lined up, but because of the size of the picture, would have done a better job about that next time. So you can see here, again, my kids are standing, when I just plop them in here, they'd be standing on a tree branch, which wouldn't look real, so I went ahead and painted them out. Again, tinkered with just the various exposures. As I showed in the setup, everyone was shot under the same thing, everyone was shot under the same lighting conditions with the flash. So when I assembled this daughter, the one on top of the ornament, was actually supposed to be up in the tree branches, but it wasn't working out, and I had the idea, well, let's just put her right on the ornament. So we were able to do that. One of the things, when you shoot on a green screen, there is a little bit of bleed over from the lighting, so you can see this green tinge of stuff around here. So it was real nice. All I did in Photoshop was just went in, and it figures all this stuff out in the background for the greens, and anything that's green on that specific layer, it'll pick up. So I just told it to desaturate everything and make it a little bit darker, so that way it got rid of any kind of green cast that would have not looked quite right. Okay, so I mentioned the thicker hook. All I did there was just scale it out and fatten it up a little bit and paint in some different layers there. So that's the big part of how I brought them in. So then to make it look a little bit more realistic, so you can see here it still looks kind of, it looks like I cut and pasted them and dropped this into a tree. So a lot of that is because the lighting wasn't matching up. So I went ahead and just added some shadows in, and it's kind of subtle, but it really starts to make a big difference. And one of the ways I was able to really blend everything in was I brought in some stock stuff I have to just kind of give this golden overlay to everything. Alright, so, and then I added in a bunch of different layers. Here, let me turn these off so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I added in a bunch of layers here to actually get things to somewhat the same brightness and intensity and colors. And then when you add these over top, it really just blends, and then I'll show you how I did the final edits in Lightroom. And then of course, not to forget, the dates and our names on there, and right there. So that's pretty much how we did it. I'm going to switch back over to Lightroom and bring this full size. So this is the final edited picture, and it looks a little bit different than it does in Photoshop. And I could have done these edits in Photoshop. I'm actually just a lot quicker with Lightroom, and I prefer to use Lightroom just to organize my files, so it can also do the edit. So all I did was I bumped up the contrast here just to give it that pop. Brought down some of the highlights in here, and that just kind of balanced things out a little bit more. And texture is something that basically makes the image a little bit sharper. And that's pretty much about all I did, and then exported it until got our finished product, our Christmas card 2020. So I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun doing it. Thanks again to Josh for having the super fabulous full-time photographer course that taught me how to do a lot of these things. Thanks a lot. Merry Christmas.